Hi everyone. Welcome to tonight's webinar, Finally, an Explanation for Codependency and Narcissism. My name is Zoë Kessler and I'll be your host this evening on behalf of PsychCentral.com. And before I introduce tonight's presenter, I'd like to remind you that you will be able to access the complete webinar online at Psych Central's YouTube channel later this week. I know that most of our presenters, and certainly I know Ross Rosenberg, tonight's presenter, has so much fantastic material that I tend to listen to webinars after the fact, so that will be up at Psych Central's YouTube channel later on if you want to review what we've gone over tonight. So if you haven't already checked it out, actually, Psych Central has videos and webinars on a wide variety of mental health topics, including a previous one that tonight's presenter did for us. So please do feel free to check it out. There are lots of mental health topics and guest speakers there from many disciplines, so Psych Central's YouTube channel. Now, during tonight's webinar, please do feel free to ask questions, and to do so, just type them into the question area on your control panel. We will try to answer everyone's questions, although we do have a huge registration for tonight, so do type your question in early, and we do hope to get to all of them, but we'll also do our best to wrap up the session within an hour. So tonight's guest is Ross Rosenberg, as I mentioned. He's a codependency psychotherapist and professional trainer. He's the owner of Clinical Care Consultants in Arlington Heights, Illinois, and Advanced Clinical Trainers. So for more information, visit Ross's YouTube channel. There's a lot of material and really great information there about his work. Now tonight, Ross will help you understand how and why you or a loved one became a codependent or narcissist. Now, drawing from his best-selling book, The Human Magnet Syndrome, Why We Love People Who Hurt Us, Ross will give us an updated explanation of the development of these two disorders. And it may surprise you to learn that both codependency and narcissism have similar beginnings. And I'm looking forward to hearing about that. So without further ado, let's say hello to Ross Rosenberg. Hi, Ross. Are you there?
Hey, Zoe. Thank you for inviting me back. I'm really glad to be on Psych Central's webinar, and I'm expecting a great evening.
Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to your presentation, and I'm just going to hand the reins over to you so that you can start your presentation, and we'll look forward to the questions and answers afterwards.
Okay, Zoe, can you see the PowerPoint?
Your first slide is there, thank you, and it's looking good, and I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, good. Well, let me first start by saying that more information about me and what I do can be found at thehumanmagnetsyndrome.com, which is also where you can find out about my book, The Human Magnet Syndrome, Why We Love People Who Hurt Us. But I'm really excited to do this because this is an element of a training that I have done probably around 70 times. I've had the great fortune to have given a 6-hour training talking about why codependents and narcissists come together naturally, if not magnetically. In fact, this training in its entirety, it brought me to writing my book. If you're interested in this training, you can just email me, and the email is included in the PowerPoint, and I can talk to you about purchasing the full CEU or CE-based training. But without further ado, let's talk about the origins of codependency and pathological narcissists. One of the things that I wanted to start off with is to tell you what I'm not going to really be talking about in entirety. Normally I talk about the human magnet syndrome, and I spend a good amount of time explaining why codependents and narcissists naturally come together in a relationship. And as I've explained using several different metaphors, there is an attraction based upon opposite personality types. I've discovered, much like a magnet where the North Pole is always attracted to the South Pole, a narcissist always seems to be attracted to a codependent. And conversely, the codependent seemingly always is attracted to the narcissist. And these opposite personality traits, the caregiver or the codependent finds comfort and experience in a relationship with the care needer. So opposite roles attract each other and similar roles repel each other, like a magnet. The magnetic roles are proportionally attracted to each other, which explains the human magnet syndrome, why we repeatedly, reflexively find ourselves in the same type of relationships. If we are a codependent, we tend to repeat our relationship pattern, and that is falling in love with or becoming involved with someone who is a narcissist. What I did early on in one of my trainings is I came up with a cartoon. I borrowed it from a gentleman, and the cartoon originally was to demonstrate what a narcissist is. And you can see a narcissist, as I believe, is the man on the left, and a person who I believe is a codependent. And the joke originally was, but enough about me. Let's talk about my job. And that's, of course, what we would expect from a narcissist. But I wanted to kind of spice up this cartoon to really explain and try to make fun of a bit the relational dynamics. So this is what happens when a codependent is at dinner. Say they met on Match.com, and they are at dinner, and this is what they're thinking. The narcissist is basically saying, OMG, oh my God, I've just met the most sensitive, caring person. Score. And of course, the codependent who fits perfectly with the narcissist is saying, OMG, so confident, bold, alas, my soulmate. So the point of this is to explain that when the narcissist and the codependent come together, it's not as if they say, oh wow, I met someone who's going to ignore me and I'm going to have to take care of. Or, oh wow, I met someone who will listen to me all the time and I get to ignore her. No, this is a natural attraction pattern that repeats it over and over again. To add a little bit of color into the cartoon, I added a thought bubble for the waiter. And he says, one order of wedding cake and divorce attorney coming up. And of course, that's my little pun because I was one of those codependents who was attracted to a narcissist, and sadly, and luckily, for me at least, it ended in divorce. And of course, eventually in therapy, and I got to figure it out. One of the things that I need to really emphasize is I use the term codependent and narcissist a lot. And I'm very careful in the way that I use them because they actually mean something. You know, I'm a therapist with 28 years experience. I'm a clinician at heart. And the term codependency has become almost a caricature of its original meaning. People use it as, you know, as an insult or a cut down. You know, it implies that you're weak or needy or clingy or even psychologically limited. Worse even is some professionals won't even use it, even when they understand it well, because they're afraid of seeming like they have weak clinical skills. And that's too bad, because as I explain in the book, The Human Magnet Syndrome, codependency is a specific disorder. But what I also want to say clearly is it's not a cut down. It's not a term to be used as a weakness. This is a psychological problem, a dilemma, and although it's not in the DSM, it has, at least in my estimation, disorder-like traits. So what I did is I came up with a way to define codependency simply, and I have to figure out how to minimize this screen. There we go. Melody Beattie, who is the absolute #1 codependency expert in my mind in the world, and also she endorsed my book. We were talking, and she asked me to define codependency in the most simple and basic terms. And that was a challenge because in my book I have a chapter that talks about codependency, and I believe it's about a 15-page chapter. But I was up to that challenge. So here is what I believe is the updated, specific, and precise definition of codependency. Quote, codependency is a psychological condition that is manifested in relationships. Codependents give a great deal more love, care, and respect from others than they expect, request, and ultimately receive. Even though codependents are resentful and angry about the inequality of the love, respect, and care given and taken, they do not terminate the relationship. In the event that they or their partner do end a relationship, codependents perpetually find themselves on the giving end of a new relationship. So I offer you that definition because we're going to talk about codependence and narcissists and the origins of these two, what I would call disorders. If this was video, you would see me with my quotes up, because they're not, codependency is not technically a disorder because it would be in the DSM-5. In an effort to further clarify codependency, I needed to come up with a categorical definition, because the more that I talked about codependence, the more people said, well, they seem like narcissists, well, they lie, they're also manipulative. How could someone be so good and helpful and be bad? And in order to answer these questions repeatedly, I created this designation. There are two types of codependence. There's a passive codependent and an active codependent. The passive codependent is, if you guys can remember, if you're mature like me or on the older side, you might remember the sitcom in the 60s and 70s called All in the Family. Edith Bunker was the quintessential passive codependent. Passive and stoic. These codependents are salt of the earth. They will give everything to everyone, and they don't complain. But there is another type of codependent, the willful, manipulative one, that fights back, that lies, that will find themselves trying to manipulate their narcissistic partner. But what makes these two codependents? And my answer is, a codependent is not defined by what they do, not necessarily by their personality. It's being in a relationship with a narcissist, and they give substantially more love, care, and respect, and don't receive it in return, and they stay in this relationship. The difference of the passive codependent is they are stoic but altruistic. The active codependent is always trying to catch, change, or entrap the narcissist to try to change them. Ultimately, these two individuals, these codependents, stay unloved, uncared, unrespected in their relationship. And I'm having a glitch in my PowerPoint, so please just hold on one second, and we will get back on track. There we go. So now let me talk about narcissists. Again, in my book, I have 60 pages dedicated to a discussion of what I call pathological narcissists. I have several videos on my YouTube channel and also in my training, but I will simply explain that a pathological narcissist is one of 4 disorders. They are either a narcissistic personality disorder, they have borderline personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, and or an addiction. These individuals are pathologically narcissistic. They are harmful in their relationships. They have impaired relationships. They don't understand that they have problems. They blame people for their problems. They're unaware of the harm that they cause others. They don't have a willingness or an ability to solve their problem because they don't know it. And if challenged, they can be very angry and hurtful. So in a nutshell, narcissists are all about themselves and in relationships. They think solely about their own need for love, respect, and care. And codependents in relationships think solely for love, care, and respect needs of other people. Now what we're going to learn tonight is that codependency and narcissism are symptoms or secondary conditions of what I call attachment trauma. Codependency is caused by something deeper. It's not the problem. And the reason it's important to talk about this tonight is that if we only treat or understand codependency as the primary problem, we won't be able to solve it. Codependency's beginnings come from someone's childhood with a narcissistic parent or caretaker or primary caregiver. It is that simple. Codependency almost always can be traced back to being a child of a pathologically narcissistic parent. This is a person whose childhood was stunted because of that relationship. Their codependency actually was a defensive coping strategy that helped them survive the trauma. Therefore, codependency, and we will find out later, narcissism, are really trauma-specific disorders. The trauma, ultimately, as I wrote in my book, the trauma and how the child experiences it will morph into a relationship template, and that relationship template is going to lead this child to eventually behave in relationships like either a codependent or a narcissist. And the reason that I have this big Band-Aid on this slide is, and on the Band-Aid I say codependency therapy, and I say that to those who are codependent or those who treat codependents, is that if we just focus on codependency as the primary problem, it's nothing more than a Band-Aid, because the real problem is a deeper wound. And eventually the Band-Aid's going to fall off. And if you don't have a therapist who understands the connection between trauma or attachment trauma and codependency, or for that matter, attachment trauma and narcissism, this therapy is only going to provide temporary relief. Resolution requires trauma-specific therapy. So now let's talk about the origins of codependency. I was most affected by Alice Miller's work, The Drama of the Gifted Child. In my own codependency recovery, when I first read this book, it was the first idea that I ever had that many people, including therapists, find themselves, they gravitate towards relationships in which they are caretakers. And this is traced back to why, to a relationship that we had with a narcissistic parent. So if the narcissist is motivated to attach to a child, to care for a child when their child makes them feel good. Narcissism is a disorder in which a person can only or wants to only pay attention to their needs. So for them to love or care for a child, somehow that child has to make them feel good. A child who fulfills the narcissistic's fantasies of being this nurturing parent gets to love. Fulfilling the fantasies guarantees conditional care and attention, and this child who is able to kind of walk this fine line between getting her needs cared for and suspending her needs is a child that is going to grow up and find relationships in which being a caretaker is more familiar and comfortable. So codependency, and when I say always, I have to say there's been many people over the last 5 years when I created these ideas, these theories, these explanations. They say, Ross, you shouldn't say always. And I hear that. But I like to say, and I believe this, that anyone who has codependency, according to my definition, in almost all in all situations, you can trace back to a relationship in which there was attachment issues. They had a parent figure, a parent, who suffered from mental illness, who was narcissistic, who was one of the pathological narcissists or an addict. Narcissistic parents create codependence, period. A narcissist's view of others, or especially their child, is an extension of themselves. They believe a child is going to rescue them from their own pain, and they have a fantasy of this child delivering them into a world in which they are finally appreciated and their pain that they've suffered their whole life at the hands of their own narcissistic parent will be solved. So they therefore have a fantasy-based concept of parenthood. The child is going to make them feel better. Now this is a reversal, because we know that with healthy parents, we parents are always there to make our children happy, and we unconditionally love them. But for this poor child of a narcissistic caregiver, that child will get the narcissist's love if he or she can mirror back to their parent their own self-worth. The child who's to become a codependent will have to be the healing self for the narcissist, to right the wrongs of the attachment trauma of their parent, to finally make them feel loved and lovable, to be needed and adored like they never were. That's the fantasy. The narcissistic parent wants a child, has a child, because that child is going to deliver them from the pain that they've had their whole life. But the problem is children aren't supposed to do that for adults. Therefore, the narcissist is going to have one or two reactions. For the child who can figure out how to make mommy or daddy happy, who can conform to their needs, this is a child that will get conditional love. But the narcissist will neglect or abuse the child that doesn't conform to their needs. Therefore, there is a lot riding on this child, this baby, this toddler, this young adult to tune in, to attune to their parents' needs. Now, this is kind of this is the opposite of what should happen in healthy relationships. Parents should attune to their child's needs. But sadly, the child of a narcissist, if they are going to get loved, they have to figure out how to reflexively adopt to the role of the pleasing child, or as Alice Miller would say, the gifted child. Because pleased narcissists are motivated to care for their child. Sadly, pleased narcissists, the narcissists who have a child that fulfills their parenting or nurturing fantasy, they will take care of this child. Being needed and adored is confused with feelings for love for the baby. The narcissist, as I discuss in my book and in other of my videos, is actually unable to unconditionally love someone because of the psychological damage they endured, which we will talk about in about 10 or 15 minutes. Therefore, successful adaptation requires the child to learn the myriad of conditions, to respond quickly and accurately to the emotional fluctuations, cues, and demands of the narcissist, to develop a radar to detect the narcissist's unpredictable emotional vacillations, to be hypervigilant, to scan the environment, to watch the cues, to know when to be the trophy child, the good child, the angel, the soldier, the prince, the princess, to be able to predict the moods, to avoid the triggers, and at all costs to avoid creating a narcissistic injury. Or in other words, doing something that will provoke anger and rage to the parent. If the child responds accurately and quickly, then he or she ensures her or his own safety and physical care. This is a child that is not neglected. Physically, they are showed off. They are bought things. They are sometimes spoiled, and I use the word spoiled. Well, they are overindulged. But this is not because the parent loves that child. It's because that child makes the narcissist feel good about themselves. What happens is this child then grows up feeling invisible. Invisibility guides skill acquisition. If you learn as a child that if my needs are not broadcast and I somehow can figure out how to make mommy and daddy happy, you grow up knowing that your needs are only going to be taken care of when it makes your narcissistic parent feel good. So these children grow up feeling invisible, and they become adults who feel invisible in their relationships. They become superb actors, pretending to be happy when they're not, experts at delaying gratification. This is a child who can easily control and suppress or even sublimate their emotions. You don't expect that from children in a healthy family. A child should just be free to express his or her emotion with some oversight, perhaps mild or age-appropriate, developmentally appropriate consequences. But this child understands that outward negative reactions, crying, arguing, not smiling, can be dangerous, can trigger the narcissist's shame, causing a narcissistic injury, which then results in getting them hurt or neglected. Therefore, this child is traumatized by needing to adopt an identity of the fantasy child, to be loved and to get their needs met, they have to fulfill the fantasy. And fulfilling the fantasy stunts their psychological and developmental growth. They are wounded, psychologically wounded, deeply wounded by a childhood of compliance with unnatural expectations. This is a child that at age 3, 4, or 5 is calm when frightened, happy or quiet when angry, lovable in unlovable situations, stoic when hungry. These are the children that are the old souls. You hear the narcissist brag about their parent. My child is so mature. She never asks for anything. She's always there to help me out. This is a child that is not just born as a natural sacrificer, but learns that that's the role that it allows them to be cared for. They hide in the shadows. A child who has a parent who is a pathological narcissist, if they become front and center, they take the spotlight away from their parent and risk being harmed. So they blend in their environment like a chameleon, avoiding unnecessary attention, because to be paid attention to for their needs could take the spotlight away from the narcissist, and that could be dangerous. This is a child that is prematurely mature, and this is where I talked about the term old soul. I've noticed that lately when people tell me their child is an old soul. And for a while I thought, well, that's a nice compliment. But I started to see that this child is prematurely mature. They usually have a self-esteem and a self-concept that coalesces around their ability to be a caretaker for adults and children, to remain calm in a crisis, to not ask for what they need, reflexively sacrificing. They listen when they want to talk. They're composed and in control, instead of normally being silly and impulsive, being a child. This is a child, a premature, mature child that mutes negative feelings. They know instinctively and intuitively that to be sad, mad, or resentful will be perceived as a negative comment by their narcissistic parent, and that could result in narcissistic injury. They learn to numb all feelings except positive feelings. Being happy and glad and excited are safe. Negative feelings are dangerous. They become the smiley, optimistic, and stoic child. They behave as an adult before their time, and sadly, they sacrifice their childhood to make their narcissistic parent happy. As a child gets older, they parent the narcissist, and that's the role reversal, the sad role reversal. They manage their emotions. They bolster their confidence. And in some cases, what we see is called emotional incest, when the child meets the emotional needs of the parent. The parent, like if we think of sexual incest, we know the horrible action of a parent using a child to meet their sexual needs because they can't meet those needs with adults. Emotional incest, which is almost as damaging, but of course not as damaging as sexual incest, it's a similar dynamic. The parent meets their emotional and social needs through their parents. They become their child's, the child becomes their best friend. They confide with their child and they treat them like a pseudo-spouse. Or when angry, they triangulate that child into arguments or fights that they're having with their spouse or the child's other father. This child strives for early independence, not because they were raised well, but because they want to make it easier for the narcissist. They want to become the low-maintenance child. This is the child that will become the straight-A student to give the parent bragging rights, that will get the scholarships, that will get a job at age 18 because they want to help the parent, not so much because they want to be independent. They become expert listeners, patient, forgiving, compassionate, and empathetic. Overachieving. Sounds all like good stuff, but no. These traits are forged out of a childhood of not knowing that they can be loved unconditionally. They become the overachiever, and they provide the narcissist with their bragging rights. They become the trophy child, the child who the narcissist can parades around in order to feel good about themselves. The results then is this child unconditionally learns to love those who are only able to love them conditionally. They are selfless in relationships, reflexively others-oriented. They deny their own needs. They feel safe and familiar with selfish and self-centered people. They rescue people from their feelings, and they're proud and determined because of their selflessness. They can also bend reality with ease. They believe in what seems ridiculous statements like selfishness and sacrifice are virtues. Happy and safety requires personal sacrifice. Good people don't require much, or it's selfish to ask what you need, or self-reliance is an asset. They bend reality in order to match the relationship needs of a narcissistic caretaker. This perfect child becomes a perfect spouse, the perfect friend. This child becomes the expert pretender and emotional stuffer. So before we shift and we start talking about the origins of pathological narcissism, I want to summarize that a child who is born to a pathological narcissist has to mirror the narcissist's need or fantasy, because they are not loved unconditionally, because a narcissist needs too much, needs their own pain to go away, and this child learns early, and in order to get their conditional love, they have to figure out a way to make the narcissist happy. And this is a very sad childhood, because a child never is loved unconditionally, and eventually learns that love is to be a human doing instead of a human being. And that's very sad, because that will manifest into a relationship template that will later manifest into codependency and relationships with the narcissist. So let's talk about the origins of pathological narcissism. Now this confuses or surprises a lot of people, because the narcissist and the codependent can come from the same parent. Why do you ask? Why is that possible? Well, think about it. Think of one of the most codependent people you know that has a sibling or has siblings. And what will happen is you will naturally think of a family in which the child is either a codependent, grows up to be a codependent adult, or a narcissist adult. And why does this happen in the same family? Well, let me tell you. Narcissistic parents, as we have already discussed, create codependent children who will later become codependent adults. While the codependent to-be adapts to the narcissistic parent, the narcissistic to-be does not or cannot. They, by their very nature, are disappointing to the narcissist. They cannot live up to the fantasy. This is a child who might be a colicky child, a child that is just born independent. I mean, for those of us who have more than one child, we know that children are just born with temperaments. Some children, their first word is no. But if you are a narcissist and you have this fantasy that this child is going to make all your problems go away, and your child is not your fantasy child, it's a child that has stinky diapers, that's crying all the time, that has a lot of needs, and cannot figure out how to make you feel good about yourself, this child doesn't live up to the fantasy. It reminds this parent of what's wrong with their lives. This child is unfairly labeled as a disappointing and difficult child, or sometimes called the bad seed. They are harshly reacted to. In other words, a child that can't make the narcissistic parent feel good about themselves triggers narcissistic injuries. And they mirror the narcissist. The narcissist projects all that is bad about themselves that they can't see onto the child. The child that cries doesn't appreciate them. The child that won't pick up her toys is selfish. Really, this is all about the narcissist worldview that they see in this poor little child who's just being a normal, maybe high-maintenance child. These children never had a chance to be anyone other than their projection. Their label as a bad child becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. No matter what they do, they just can't seem to figure out, like the child who was able to make the narcissist happy, or the gift child, or the trophy child. They never had a chance to be anyone other than the bad child. Because we know that children are born good, but it's not the case for the narcissistic parent. You either make them happy and you're good, or you don't and you're not. These children are more traumatized than the child who's going to be codependent. The narcissistic parent harms the child who can't be pleased. Now I want to read something that Drew Keyes wrote, and this is online on his website. Narcissistic parents try to convince themselves and others that the problems are coming not from themselves but another source. In their minds, by blaming another, they absolve themselves of any wrongdoing. And they can continue to believe and strive to convince others that they are in fact perfect, but they must first find someone to blame. This presents a parent with exactly what their mental disorder is making them feel they must have, an external object upon which to blame, so they can continue the reassuring fantasy that there's nothing wrong with themselves or the family. The narcissist parent blames the child for acting out. They never consider that the child is crying or upset because they're not getting their needs met. They can't, because of their pathological narcissism, accept any fault or responsibility. Blaming the child for all the problems insulates them from realizing their own parenting failures. This child, unlike the child who becomes the trophy or the gifted child or the pleasing child, is raised in a perilous double-bind environment. They can't please their parent and is always punished. They're punished when angry. They're punished when they're punished when angry about being punished. They're punished just because they are and always have been disappointing. It's very sad to think about a child who is constantly the brunt of a narcissistic injury, constantly afraid of their unpredictable, unstable, and dangerous parent. This child who endures so much more abuse and neglect and deprivation than perhaps their sibling who will become codependent may even disassociate from the abuse, neglect, or deprivation in a way to cope, but still always in wanting love and attention. This disappointing and bad child is hurt. They are the recipient of harm. They are moving targets for unmitigated abuse and neglect. This child is traumatized very, very much more intensely and more frequently than the child that can figure out the needs of their parent. They become a metaphorical dartboard upon which a narcissist angrily hurls darts of disappointment, resent, and even disgust. This child lives with fear and dread. See, what I'm doing is I'm painting a picture for you why the narcissist adult is so damaged. Because their childhood was a nightmare. They grew up constantly resentful and angry at their parent, but wanting to be loved. Constantly trying to prove, they constantly prove to the narcissist their own unworthiness just by being themselves, by wanting to be loved but not being able to make their parent happy. They grow up with no internal capacity to respond altruistically to others, because there's a point in time that this child who is abused and neglected for being the disappointing child learns that it doesn't pay, and they turn into themselves, and any form of empathy that they could have learned early on is snuffed out. They learn that the world is not a safe place, that it's a dog-eat-dog world, and you better get what you can get for yourself, because if you don't, you're going to lose it. Over time, this child internalizes their mistreatment. They take on their parents' projected self-loathing, insecurities, lost dreams, anger, and rage. They absorb everything that's bad about the narcissist that they're blamed for, and that becomes the core of their identity. They become the child who deserves to be unloved and abandoned. because they act out, and their survival requires them to fight back. And ultimately, they are disappointing and perceived as ungrateful and damaged. And that's the sad part, because this child never was damaged. And in order to reduce their parents' act of harm, they identify with the role of the bad child as a way to shield themselves. Now, this might seem paradoxical, but the child has only one choice now. They're not going to be loved, so they might as well fight back. They develop contempt for others who are untrustworthy. Self-esteem results from what they can do for others, what they can do for themselves. They don't attach to anyone. They don't trust anyone, and they develop a selfish and hostile worldview. Without warmth, acceptance, and unconditional love, this child closes down emotionally. They lose hope of ever being loved or considered lovable. The child learns they are essentially unworthy, the world is unsafe, to rely only on themselves. Shame and anger accumulates as the child learns that he or she and the narcissist are indeed separate. The narcissist's needs are more important than their own. Love and safety never come. Criticism, neglect, or abuse are the norm. And she, as a person, is a burden to the world. Failed attempts to be loved creates that foundation of rage and anger, the foundation that is the core of a narcissist personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, or ASPD. Because the shame is too unbearable to accept, it is relegated to the unconscious and locked behind iron walls of denial. This is the defense mechanism that helps them survive. To adapt to a world in which they are not important, they have to figure out how to survive. And to survive is they have to push all of that hatred and the memories of abuse and neglect back into their unconscious mind. They have to repress it, which explains why that narcissists cannot remember their childhood or the abuse of their childhood, because the pain is so deep. It also explains why narcissists are not ideal psychotherapy clients, because they cannot access memory of their childhood. They cannot talk about themselves as potentially being flawed because they can't go there. The rage and the pain is locked behind ironclad walls of denial. It's repressed. Successful coping results in an egotistic life view. Egotism becomes the emotional foundation, the emotional narcissistic foundation. Egotism helps the child survive, and it's a paradox. What becomes the narcissism is actually the coping mechanism, as what becomes the codependency is actually the coping mechanism. An inflated sense of their own importance, an exaggerated sense of self, is the fractured core of every pathological narcissist. Therefore, taking care of self at the expense of others help them survive their childhood. But the curse is it would morph into a very difficult and sometimes impossible to treat disorder, one in which the person hurts so badly but they don't know it, and they can't seek help because they don't realize there's anything wrong with them. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to summarize before I answer any questions, is that what I talked about is the developmental explanations of what causes codependency. A child learns to identify with their narcissistic parents' fantasy of child rearing, and if they can get it and be the trophy child, the pleasing child, they learn that love comes when they sacrifice and are human doings. The child that can't get it triggers the narcissist's shame and anger and resentfulness, and this child is bombarded with harm and survives by shutting down and learning the world is unsafe. And what we have are explanations for the cause or the development of narcissism and codependency. Well, that concludes the formal presentation, and now I would like to answer any questions if there are some.
Hi.
Zoe?
Yes, can you hear me, Ross?
I can.
Fantastic. We have tons of questions, actually. So we'll just change the screen over and yeah, okay, so I'm going to take the questions in the order that they came in, just in all fairness, but I will let you know that we have a lot of them, so I don't know how you want to handle that, keeping the answers short, or I don't know, but
No.
let's dive in. Okay, so one of the first questions is, so, are there situations where the codependent child of a narcissistic parent does not comply, especially as the child moves into adolescence, and what does that look like? How is that different from what is being described now? And at the time the question was answered, of course, you were speaking about a compliant child.
Yeah, what happens in normal human development is a child naturally starts to resist the parent and argue with the parent, and this is what we know as normal teen years. The child who is going to be a codependent child, the child who is eventually going to be a codependent adult does not go through that stage. This is a child that is fearful of upsetting their narcissistic parent and sacrifices a very important developmental stage of independence. So it is my experience that a child who successfully goes through that stage and who is able to strike on her own and individuate with her parent might be a child that has some residual psychological damage, but will most likely not be a codependent adult.
Okay, great. Thank you. So the next one is, are there situations where narcissism and codependency might exist in different ways in the same child?
In my book, I go to great pains to talk about codependency and narcissism on a continuum. You cannot be a codependent and a narcissist at the same time. You can be a person who has some moments of caretaking and some moments of caretaking of others and some moments of taking care of self. That is what I call a healthy person that fluctuates between meeting their own needs and meeting the people's needs around them. That's not a codependent, that's not someone who's codependent and narcissistic. And my continuum of self, which is a theory that's provided in my book, explains how there is healthy caretaking of self and there's healthy caretaking of others. So I don't see a person who's simultaneously a codependent narcissist. In fact, I think it's impossible.
Huh. Okay, great. Thank you. Next, what kind of relationships is the bad child then attracted to as an adult if he or she may not become the codependent adult to be?
Well, if we think about this child, ultimately the harm that they suffered creates ultimately one of the pathological narcissistic disorders. According to the human magnet syndrome, this narcissist is going to be magnetically, automatically, or reflexively attracted to codependence, because in a relationship like that, someone who needs someone's complete love, respect, and care at the expense of their own selves, the only person that's probably going to do that is the codependent. So we go back to that one cartoon. The codependent sees the narcissist in the beginning as a desirable person, and the narcissist sees the codependent as a desirable person. So the answer is that person is going to be attracted to codependent people because that's the only type of individual that's going to take care of someone who is so self-centered.
Okay, thanks. The next question is, can someone possess tenderness and empathy yet still be a narcissist?
No. Now again, going back to the continuum of self and the degrees of taking care of oneself and the degrees of taking care of others, you can't have both sides. And I talk about that. In fact, there's going to be an article in the American Counseling Association's Counseling Today magazine in May that actually it introduces my continuum of self model. Or if you're interested, you could buy my book. But you can't be someone who's completely absorbed with their own needs and be someone who's completely absorbed with other needs. But you certainly can be a healthy person who connects to other people's needs while connecting to self. That's balance. That's neither codependency or narcissism.
Okay, thanks. We have so many questions. Wow. We might have to have you back again, Ross. Okay. Can a codependency be bad in genuine and trustworthy people? Can their perception be so skewed that they create conflict that isn't present?
Codependents tend to be optimistic and patient, but I just want to be really, really careful, as there is a wide range of personality types for someone who is a codependent. And that's what I resist doing, is saying a codependent is always this type of person. A codependent has a range of personality types, but is always in a relationship in which their need for love, respect, and care is sacrificed while they're taking care of others. They can be jolly and jovial and perpetually happy to kind of negative and pessimistic. So, but those two opposite traits do not describe codependency. It's, do they take care of themselves more than others, or vice versa?
Mm-hmm. Okay. I hope you don't mind. We're just going to keep going through these. All right. So the next one is, can a person flip-flop these two roles, sometimes act as the codependent, but other times act as the narcissist?
In a healthy relationship, when your self-orientation, we're probably going to have to come back and do a training on the continuum of self-theory, because that would answer all these questions. But if someone is a dyed-in-the-wool pathological narcissist, the only time that they flip-flop is if they do it in order to get their needs met. So if they are nice or they are generous, it's usually because there's an ulterior motive. And that still is narcissistic. If someone gives a gift or is generous and they have a narcissistic personality disorder, it's usually because they have something that they need and they're getting it through their altruism, their kindness. So no, it's my experience that if you qualify for what I diagnose as a pathological narcissist, or you qualify for what I diagnose as a codependent, you can't be both. But you can be the codependent who manipulates and lies, but you're still, if you're in that relationship and you are the sacrificer, you're still codependent. You can be the narcissist who is nice and gives gifts, but if you're in relationships where everything is about you, you're still the narcissist.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great.
I should add that my #1 viewed YouTube video is called Covert Narcissists, the wolf in sheep's clothing.
Okay, thank you. Is it possible for the child to attach to the non-narcissistic parent?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I didn't have time to talk about this, and I do suggest people purchasing the 6-hour version of this training so you can get a complete information. But the codependent parent is a nurturing source, and if there is attachment, it's going to be to the codependent parent. Unfortunately, the damage caused by the narcissistic parent supersedes their ability to develop healthy adult, what I call relationship templates.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Here's another one. I was the scapegoat child. If my codependent mother predeceases my narcissist father, what tactics can I use to not get cut out of the family entirely?
I can't answer that because it kind of goes beyond the scope of this training, but I did write a training that's available on my website, and it's called Reversing the Human Magnet Syndrome. And in that training, I actually talk about what to do and how to do it.
Okay, great. Thank you. Is there hope for the narcissist-codependent relationship? Can they recover?
I mean, I get that question a lot. So the answer is, can the narcissist be involved in a therapeutic experience where they take responsibility and learn to be more empathetic? My experience is if you're a pathological narcissist, you don't have that capability, and the relationships usually end when the codependent gets healthy. It's a sad pronouncement, but it goes back to, can the narcissist take responsibility and move towards the center? Mm-hmm. If they can, there's hope.
Okay.
But then they wouldn't be pathological narcissists. They would be just narcissists.
Huh. Fascinating. Okay, here's another one. Oh, actually, let's check the time. Yes, we have 1 minute. I am a therapist and daughter of a narcissistic father. How can I nurture him in a healthy way without violating my boundaries of codependency recovery and trying to navigate a functional relationship with him when he is very much ill with narcissism?
Okay, do we have 45 minutes?
No.
That's a question that probably can best answered if, by viewing or purchasing my other training, which actually starts to give explanations. This training, this excerpt of this training, or the larger training, explains the whys. Why are people like this? My other work explains what to do, and my follow-up work will also explain what to do.
Okay. Now, Ross, I'm aware that it is 8 o'clock, and we never run overtime, but my goodness, you are a popular presenter. Do you mind staying on with us for another 5 minutes?
It would be my pleasure.
Oh, fabulous.
As a recovering codependent, I like to take care of people. I also have boundaries, so I would love to, and I'm flattered and honored.
Full disclosure. Thank you so much. Okay, we'll try to get a couple more questions in here, and then we will have to wrap up. So here's one. I am the daughter of both narcissist parents. I am a codependent and also my daughter. How can I reconcile this?
Psychotherapy with a person that has background with codependency as a trauma-based issue. In my latest training, Reversing the Human Magnet Syndrome, Codependency and Trauma Recovery, to reverse this, to change this, is really to involve yourself in a form of therapy that understands the roots of your codependency and work at that level. And having a therapist that has that background can make all the difference.
Thank you. Okay, here's one more. It seems to me the experience of molestation by an adult, a narcissistic adult, can also cause codependency.
Well, actually, I would challenge that. I would say that molestation by any parent can be harmful and have and result in some form of psychological, emotional problem, stunting, or pathology. But if you're a child who was raised as the pleasing child and you were molested, you are going to be a child who's probably going to grow up codependent with a lot more, with deeper and more profound psychological issues because you have the trauma of sexual abuse and you were raised as this pleasing, gifted child. But you could have also been the bad child, the bad seed who was molested. And again, I guess the answer to that is the molestation is going to exacerbate and add many more levels to the psychological adult self.
Okay. I want to know what to do to get over the feeling that my ex left me in. He made me feel like I was the person who was a narcissist. I am angry for how he left me. He used a saying that he needed assets because of his happiness. He told me I was selfish, yet I can't see how I was. Is this normal to come from a narcissist? I just don't know what to do anymore.
I'll answer this by telling you a story. I was doing a seminar in Boston, and someone came up to me and said their boyfriend bought my book and accused her of being a narcissist and broke up with her, and she was crushed. And she goes, "What do I do?" And something didn't seem right because someone who's a narcissist would not be crushed and be sad. In fact, they would think there's nothing wrong. So I started asking her about her boyfriend, and what I found out is the boyfriend read my book and decided he liked the codependency explanation because that made him feel better about himself. And he manipulated, as narcissists do, her into believing she was a narcissist. Because think about it, who's going to fall prey to the pathological narcissist manipulation? Is the codependent. So she walked around feeling like a narcissist because someone told her, but in reality, she was the codependent who was manipulated by the narcissist. So I tell you that story to answer the question is that the narcissist cannot see that there's anything wrong with them. And therefore, they feel like they're the victim and they blame everyone else. Well, that's their own reality, but that's not true reality. So I say to that person, don't adopt your partner's reality. Figure out what is your own, and you'll find out that you were never the narcissist
Wow.
But maybe the gullible, pliable, manipulative codependent.
Huh. Okay, wow, that was amazing. So, I'm very good at getting rid of a mate that I realize is narcissistic, but it takes me several months. How do I recognize these charming, loving men more quickly as narcissists? What are the cues or red flags?
Read my book, and I'm not trying to sell my book, but my book, that's what my book is all about. Look at my videos. If the book is cost prohibitive, go on YouTube and look at my videos. And I spent a lot of time talking about the different narcissists and all the cues, but that would be a training in itself.
Okay, great, thank you. So, when is it okay to love a narcissist, or is it?
The answer is, well, the question I would like to say, when is it okay to love someone who can't love you, who does not take care of you? I think that the listener would have the answer. It's never okay. It's only okay to love someone who participates in an equal distribution of love, respect, and care. But when you're in a relationship where it's all one-sided, and it's always that way, I say it's not okay. And I say it's time for you to get some help, to get therapy, and push your partner into therapy, which could help them if they're not a pathological narcissist. Because again, there are levels of narcissism, and only the pathological narcissist seems to be resistant to therapy.
Okay, we just have a couple more questions. Are you all right for this? Couple more?
Yep, absolutely. Okay. Let's do two more.
Okay. Why do I constantly miss my abusive ex-husband?
Because you are a codependent. And I have learned and talked about in my second training, Reversing Human Magnet Syndrome, is codependency is an addiction, and the #1 withdrawal symptom is loneliness. A codependent that is not in a relationship with a narcissist experience deep, emotionally painful, and even physically painful loneliness. And that feeling of loneliness is so deep and aversive and painful, it draws them back into fantasizing or thinking about the person that hurt them badly. Like the drug addiction, the alcoholic, the nicotine addict. When your drug is gone, you are starting to remember only the positive things. That's when you need to be in therapy, codependent trauma-specific therapy, and over time you'll detox. This is explained in detail in my latest training.
Okay, I thank you very much, Ross. Okay, I think we really should wrap it up, I guess, very quickly, and I think the answer will be check out all your amazing resources and information. Advice for a mother with 2 professional narcissistic daughters. One is a diagnosed narcissist, passive, and the other one, younger, is not passive. I am worn, in all capital letters, out.
Get help. And find someone who can help you with your codependency to set boundaries. In fact, watch the last webinar that Psych Central did with me, and it's the 4 stages of codependency recovery. Watch that, and that will be specific guidance in what will happen when you go through those stages and how you can finally find self-love.
Excellent, excellent. Yes, and thank you for the plug for our Psych Central webinars. Great. Now, this is a comment, Ross, and I did want to share it with you. This is an excellent and practical framework, so helpful. Can you speak to the specific research that has informed the creation of it? Now, would that be in your book? Hello?
In my book, I talk about all of the people that, yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, hello? I can now. Yeah.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me? Hello?
So, yeah, in my book, yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes. I can hear you.
Okay, so in my book, I go to great pains in identifying all the sources for the shake theories. You have a 50-page bibliography. Anywhere from family systems theory, psychodynamic theory, cognitive behavioral treatment, dialectical behavioral treatment, Erik Erikson, Freud. There are so many theorists
Okay, Ross,
profoundly smart
we're
therapists
losing
who have
Ross.
shaped my understanding. And many theories.
We're losing the audio with you, so I think we'll just say check the
Yes.
references in the book, and I think we better wrap it up for tonight. And absolutely, I will send you an invitation, Ross. Beg you to come
check
back.
the references in the book, and it sounds like we're losing connection. So if you can hear me, check the references.
Okay, so I'm going to remind everyone that the
Zoe,
replay...
you're kind of going in and out, so I'm going to assume that the listeners can hear me, and I can't hear you, Zoe. But check.
Okay, you're going in and out as well. So, can you hear me, Ross?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I'm going to mute you, and I'm going to wrap it up here. And I'd like to remind everyone that the replay of tonight's webinar will be posted at Psych Central's YouTube channel later this week. And thanks to everyone who attended live tonight, and also to those of you who are listening to the replay. I'd also like to thank Psych Central for hosting, and of course, our special guest presenter, psychotherapist and author Ross Rosenberg. Thank you so much again for an excellent presentation, and we do hope to have you back. And thanks for sticking around for an extended version. And on behalf of PsychCentral.com and me, Zoë Kessler, thanks for joining us, and good night.